Out of every pre-release cycle I've witnessed, Dehya's has definitely been the most depressing and desolating one. Previewed as a character that was in serious need of buffs, she got worse instead, and this just unmotivated most of the theory crafters that were planning to analyze her. As a result, Dehya is probably one of the most ignored characters up to date in terms of theory crafting activity. Luckily for you, I've prepared something myself, which I'll show you in this video. I will go through Dehya's potential role on teams and analyze her composition's potential performance from a damage standpoint. Let's get straight into it. First of all, it's important to understand Dehya's requirements in terms of team building and how those impact her possible fate on teams. By being an off-field defensive unit, who has a burst that characterizes most of her damage output, ideally, Dehya will fate alongside other carries such as Hu Tao, Yoimiya or Ganyu, providing something similar to a damage reduction effect and interruption resistance for them, and then go on field and strike with a huge nuke. Let me explain the limitations that will make it extremely hard for her to fit that role. Dehya's issue is that despite her kit design and overall damage output both point at her being a sub-DPS, her requirements are carry-like. There are two core issues. First, if not batteried properly, her energy requirements can surpass 200 HR even on double Pyro teams, which is basically Zhongli level of energy starving. Second, her field time is too lengthy for her to be a traditional sub-DPS, as between her elemental skill cast and her elemental burst usage, she'll spend at least 7 seconds, likely 8 on field, which make it hard for her to slot into most carries rotations if you plan to use her burst. I think a perfect comparison here is Zhongli. Before Zhongli released, many were hyped for his elemental burst to be a big nuke. But then, after people understood the implication of motion values per second, meaning the actual damage value of a move if adjusted by how much time is required to use it, many started calling it a damage loss. Dehya is in the exact same spot. Considering how much you have to invest on her in terms of EHAR to be able to use her burst every rotation, and her 6 seconds field time requirement for her elemental burst alone, that makes it a damage loss in every team that has a carry. To contextualize it, imagine if you picked Hu Tao's standard teams and you added a Diluc personal damage window on top of it. Rotations would easily reach 26 seconds of length, and Dehya's poor damage potential just won't justify that. For that reason, on teams that already have carries, it's better to use her as an elemental skill bot, meaning you place her field and then put her on standby for the whole rotation to take advantage of her defensive utility alone. Alternatively, you can make a team which fully revolves around the idea of maximizing her damage output by battering her properly through somebody like Bennett and providing her burst damage window enough buffs for its damage to be at least acceptable. However, more issues arise for that scenario. First, the team will be filled by sub-DPS, and in general, hypercarry teams such as this one don't require defensive utility from the carry to protect the sub-DPS, but the other way around. Second, since the only one who can battery her well in the game is Bennett, and is also a healer, that makes her defensive utility much less important. Considering that the majority of her kit focalizes on it, this is a big deal. To follow up on the things I said, the teams I analyzed their performance on are Mono Pyro with Zhongli, Bennett and Kazuha, Hypercarry with Mona, Kazuha and Bennett, and lastly as an elemental skill bot for Ganyu, since in that case her interruption resistance utility is useful. The results weren't that exciting. In the case of Mono Pyro, her energy requirements still stay relatively high, Even if you assume something extreme like Bennett being able to funnel her with his skill 3 different times in a rotation, and Kazuha holding Favonius and proccing it 1 or 2 times per rotation, the team's damage output is not totally bad, thanks to the Bennett-Kazuha core, which provide invaluable buffs for both Xianling and Dehya, but it pales in comparison to other mono-pyro variants, such as Klee, who can take advantage of those buffs better, since the rotation multipliers are just higher than Dehya's all around. It's worth noting that Xianling outdamages Dehya on the team, even in the scenario where you prioritize funneling Dehya over her, which causes a 50 to 60 ER difference between them in Dehya's favor. For the Mona team, let me clarify that even with her scarce application, Mona can somewhat allow Dehya to proc Vaporize well. In fact, due to having a standard internal cooldown, Dehya can Vaporize up to 5 hits during her burst, and her kick as the final hit. With her burst alone, Mona can generate 2.5 units of Hydro, which will be enough for 4 or 5 different Vaporize procs with 1 unit of elemental application, meaning Dehya can Vaporize most of her hits with Mona, which makes the latter an ideal partner, also considering how much she can buff Dehya through the Thrilling Tales weapon and her own elemental burst. Sadly, the attempt of running Dehya as a full-blown hypercarry also looks like a miserable failure at the moment, since her damage output is just too low in that scenario as well if compared to all other units that can be used in the hypercarry role, so the team DPS just ends up being bad. Regarding her role on Ganyu melt teams, since her elemental skill application is too low and inconsistent for her to enable Ganyu melts by herself, you'd still need to use somebody like Xianling on the team, or tactics such as Jin Sunfire and Kazuha Pyro Infusion. I've analyzed her on a comp with Ganyu, Xianling and Bennett, and let's just say that while the results aren't bad, they're generally worse than they'd be if you use Zhongli on the team instead, as he not only provides better offensive utility through his universal resistance reduction effect, but also provides better defensive utility through basically permanent interruption resistance, while Dehya's has more limitations. As a whole, the outlook is not great. I truly hope I'm wrong, but as of right now, I haven't managed to find any use case for Dehya that will make pulling for her from a team building standpoint worth the price. As a rule of thumb, it's always good to take pre-release calculation with a grain of salt, since things can easily look different when you try a unit in a practical game scenario, but I just won't put much hope into Dehya being good if she races as she currently is. I'm done for today. As always, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done it already. See you next time!